Good morning. Hi, everyone. Thank you for joining us today. My name is Danielle Aguas, and I'm the Vice President of Client Engagement at Center for Executive Excellence. And I am joined here today by the founder of Center for Executive Excellence, Sherry Nassim, and former Navy SEAL Lance Cummings. And in today's webinar, Sherry will interview Lance on the subject of how to build a resilient leadership mindset. So we're excited to be joining you virtually today, and we welcome you. As a retired Navy SEAL officer with 30 years of experience in combat and high threat atmospheres, Lance started Epic Charity Challenge in order to orchestrate an entirely new experience for adventure-seeking individuals. As a lifelong athlete with world-class racing experience representing the USA in international competition in 4 sports, Lance has combined the yearning for outdoor adventure, teamwork, physical and mental conditioning with the reward of giving to those who need it most in an efficient and fun venue. Lance is also an experienced coach and mentor to hundreds of special operation candidates and athletes, and he initiated the SOF, or Special Operation Forces Academy, a 1-week program conducted at the Olympic Training Center in San Diego for military, fire, and law enforcement candidates. Previous corporate clients for this training include Nike North America, Canadian Olympic Rugby Team, the Life University Rugby, BD Medical, Commonwealth Financial, US and Canadian military. We are so excited to have you today, Lance, and welcome.
Thank you very much. It's great to be here.
Some quick housekeeping though before we get started. We are recording today's webinar, and we'll share the recording with anyone who's registered, so be sure to be on the lookout for that. I also want to mention that we're using Zoom's webinar feature to host today's event, so you will be on mute and your video is turned off as a participant. Only myself, Sherry, and Lance have the ability to have our video and mics turned on. But you'll notice that you have a Q&A button on the bottom of your dashboard on your screen. Please submit your questions you have for Lance throughout this webinar. I will be fielding those questions, and if we have time at the end, I would love to ask questions that you ask him. I'd like to ask Lance those at the end, about 11:45, 11:50. So we encourage you to submit those questions through your Q&A box. But our promise to you is that we will end no later than 12 noon Pacific, so you can all get back to, as I always say, your regularly scheduled programs. So with that, here's Sherry.
Thank you, Danielle. Nice job. Hi, Lance. How are you today?
Good morning. I'm doing well, exceptionally. Thank you.
Good. Very nice. We are so appreciative that you joined us today. We have, this is, I think, the 4th in our series of leadership webinars that we've been conducting since the age of CV. And the CVs, if you will, of the people that we interview are so long and so interesting that there's just so much to pack into the short time that we have. So we really appreciate, first of all, your service to our country for over 30 years. You dedicated yourself to being in service of our country, and it's an honor to have you here, and it's humbling for us to be able just to call you Lance when we know that you've done so much. And so thank you so much. We're grateful to you for all that you've done for our country and what you continue to do to give back.
Thank you, Sherry. I'm very humble, and I'm excited to be here. Lance is my name, and that's what I always go by. So I think we strip away some of the titles and acronyms and stuff sometimes, and we get down to the real people.
Yeah. Good. Well, speaking of real people, let's just kind of give people a little bit of a background of where you came from before you joined the Navy. And then I'd love to talk a little bit about leadership lessons that you can share as a SEAL. And then I'm excited to talk about what you're doing today in terms of the challenge that you put together. I think people will be really interested in that. So I know that you grew up in Macon, Georgia. Before you joined the Navy. Can you just tell us a little bit about what was going on at that time in your life and why you joined the Navy?
Okay, Macon, Georgia, kind of the rural South. I had a outstanding childhood there. Actually grew up on a Arabian horse farm, so most of my weekends were fixing fences, cleaning stalls, putting in water pipe, things like that. So I think that helped set a very good work ethic for myself in earlier times, and it seems to be a consistent theme that you hear a lot in special forces and buds training and things like that. The people who grow up in farms and maybe never see the ocean, sometimes they make the best teammates because they know what hard work is and consistency and dedication. But my personal experience was I had graduated high school. I played football there in Central High School in Macon, Georgia. And I was working at a construction company doing demolitions for them. I happened to really like blowing things up, and I was a scuba diver as a hobbyist, and my cousin told me about the Navy SEALs and said it was one of the tougher training forces in the military. And it sounded like something that I really wanted to do, and is get out, see the world. So it had all the ingredients for me to sign my name to the dotted line and basically start my journey. At that point in time, you actually had to do a year in the fleet before you could go even put your package in for special operations. So that was a learning experience as well. When you get out, you learn to play the game, whether it's corporate or military, but you learn who's who in the zoo and how to get along with people, and you put your time in before you get the rewards for it. So that was a great learning experience for me. And then in 1983, I was able to put my package in, go to the initial training, and then from there into the SEAL teams.
That's fantastic. It sounds like you built a lot of your basic skills for leadership at home, from the hard work and dedication, and certainly growing up with an Arabian horse farm. You also can associate yourself with the very best of the best, and what it takes to stay fit and be healthy, and to be at the very top of your game. And certainly the Special Operations Forces are the elite, the creme of the creme, cream of the cream, if you would, for all military forces. So it sounds like that was something that you naturally gravitated to.
It was, and what I really was looking for was some of the camaraderie. I think that was historically there in Special Operations Forces. It's everyone is an A guy, a person, a personality. Everyone is driven. So when you're in that atmosphere, you take your game higher and higher just based on the people around you. And there's really no downtime. I mean, you have to show up every day with your A game intact, because if you don't, there's a lot of repercussions for it. Basically, the people around you will not let you lower your guard, and that's what is expected of the teammates, and that's a great atmosphere to be in. And anyone who's ever been in that atmosphere, I think you could spend the rest of your life trying to replicate that. I've talked to a lot of athletes who've been on winning football teams, and they've coached winning football teams, and every year after that, they try to replicate that dynamic atmosphere and camaraderie. So once you experience it, you could spend the rest of your life chasing the same thing.
I love the way you describe that. I too have been on winning teams and on teams that aren't so winning, and it just feels better to be a part of the winning team, to be around people who bring out the very best in yourself and make you a better version of yourself each day. And that they say that you are something about you are as good as the average of the 5 people that you spend most of your time with. So you want to spend most of your time with people who are grade A, maybe not necessarily type A personalities. I'm curious if you would just quickly give us a little bit about who your leadership role models were as you progressed through your naval career.
Sherry, I've actually had the opportunity and the good fortune to be around some of the best senior enlisted and officers in the military. And from each one of those people, I would take one trait that I would really admire, and I would try to emulate that and incorporate that into myself. For instance, the first SEAL team I was on, we had one of the best commanding officers that you could ever ask for, and every day he was out there doing physical training with us when we would go to do swims, and he was out there. But when we needed him for something to back us up for a request or something, he was also there for you. And it's very tough to not show up for something when you know the commanding officer is out there and he's doing it with the men. It's just leadership by example, and that trait stuck with me for the rest of my career, and I hope it still sticks with me now. Is you have to walk the talk. If you're going to say something, you better be able to back it up and show people exactly how to do it.
Yeah, so true, so true. Yeah, you wouldn't ask anyone to do something that you wouldn't do yourself as a leader. Those are, I think, the ones who are there, the first ones in, the last ones out, the ones who show up every day. I agree. I admire those people too. I wonder if we could talk about the job, if you will, of a SEAL team. How might that compare to what teams are facing in the era of COVID-19? Do you see any parallels there?
Well, right now when we're talking about going back to work, and then people have been working from home, but each and every time that a SEAL team deploys, they'll do an 18-month workup, of which they're probably out of the area about 240 days of the year for that 18-month, that one year for 6 months. And they will go into a war zone or a country, but it's a transition into the country. So you're not expected to hit the ground running at full speed. If there is a unit that is there that you're relieving, that unit will take you and show you the ropes prior to them departing. So there's a transitionary period. And as we go back into our workplaces, I think it's important that there's a transitionary period there as well. And some people may not be ready to go back into a full work day. Sometimes a half a work day for a week or 2 weeks just to ramp them into the workplace environment again would be beneficial. But it's important to have a group discussion about how COVID-19, how the lockdown, how all of this has affected each and every person, because each and every situation is different and every family is different. Some people will be resilient, and based on their age, life experiences, the more that they have experienced, the more resilient they're likely to be. And while some of the younger people, this could be the most traumatic event that's ever happened to them in their entire life. Hopefully it will be, but I'm sure that life is going to bring other things into their experience. But it's important, I think, that we acknowledge that each person has to deal with this emotionally, and as a group, as a work group, as a team, you have to articulate that and then put some plans into action. If some of the people need additional therapy, if they need to work with them on an individual basis to get them back up to speed where they were or better than they were. And I think it's important to come together, realize what the situation is, and then make a plan together so everyone has buy-in how to move forward at a probably a faster and bigger and better pace. Just as World War II, after World War II, 1945, the United States just went into a frenzy of production and group dynamics. Then I think a lot of the companies will also. People will be inspired to try to make up time. They've been down hard for 2 months, 3 months, and it's I think within the human persona to try to make up that time and move forward and become better people and a better nation, a better team. So that's where I see it as, just a gradual ramp up, dealing with each individual and then making a plan to move forward.
Wow, I love the way you described that, the post-World War II frenzy. I agree with that. I think there's a pent-up demand, there's pent-up desire to get back to being a part of a community, to being productive. I think we're naturally hardwired to be a part of a team and to be a part of a collective. And I do feel that there's a lot of pent-up demand, but I also appreciate the fact that you talk about meeting people where they are, that not everybody is going to be, 110% ready to go. I think you've mentioned before that when you return from a war zone, that the team transitions back slowly, and you have at least one like decompression stop along the way to make sure that people are making that adjustment and not just throw them right back into, back into their family life.
Right. And as you move into a war zone, as you move out of a war zone, we've got a systematic pattern. I think generally we'll do one stop, and it may be for about a week. And it's really hard to sell that stop to the operators, because all they want to do is go from Afghanistan back to see their loved ones. But they're not the same people that left 6 months ago. And their loved ones are not the same people that they left 6 months ago. So it's important to do a decompression stop. And I've had to do it numerous times. And it's one of the hardest things that you can try to justify to someone. But it's very important psychologically to ramp down. Just as you didn't go from crawling to running, you shouldn't go from running back to crawling. It's important that you do a transitionary phase, I think. And in the long term, we found that it's very beneficial, and it actually creates more resiliency for the people that are involved.
And during those adjustment periods and the transition back from the war zone, do you solicit help from medical and psychological professionals if needed?
Absolutely. We'll generally have them meet us at that transition period, at the decompression stop. And as difficult as it is, you fill out some questionnaires, you talk candidly with people about the experiences that you've been through and how you're going to either deal with those experiences or bring them into your life and be able to deal with those in a way that doesn't adversely affect the people that you're about to go back into life with. Because I don't think your family wants you, or that your neighbors want you to come back as the person who was just going out every cycle of darkness and going after people. You want to come back and try to assimilate into what the normal is around your society, around your civilization, your neighborhood, your family. Of course, it's going to take a little while for you to decompress, just as it took a little while for you to get up to speed. And that's why we bring in the psychologist and medical personnel. Physically, we do a combine, like an NFL combine type of a test that has 7 or 8 different components to it. So we'll do that prior to going out, and we'll do that when we come back in. So we'll determine if people are injured. Do they need physical therapy? Do they need surgery? What do they need in order to get back into the game? Do they need psychological counseling? Sometimes that's very important, but it's also important to realize that same context is going on with the families back in the United States as well, to help them realize what their loved ones have been through and to help them deal with that. So the family resiliency is just as important as the operator resiliency is.
Wow. That's so interesting, and there are so many parallels, I think, to as organizations, businesses try to transition back to reopening, that they may not come back with the same team members. Some of their team members may have been furloughed, or some of their team members may have been lost, to the virus, and so dealing with that reality as well as so I can see the need for just doing it carefully, transitioning in a way that makes sure that people are as whole as possible, and making sure that you've got the support ready for those who need physical or psychological, mental support. So I really appreciate that parallel. I wonder if you could just, from your opinion, what do you think the key elements are required for high-functioning teams?
Some of the best teams that I've ever been on have common components to them. And with those components, what I've looked at were the clear, concise communication from the leadership, communication throughout all elements of the operation, commitment from all the participants so they know why they're doing what they're doing, and the exceptional management from our senior enlisted. Our senior enlisted are more of our middle management. They're responsible for the training of the junior officers, and they're also responsible for training of the rest of the platoon. But they're the key component in a successful team. And it's very important that they have buy-in, that the entire team has buy-in on what they're doing. Mm-hmm. But it's very important that the senior management, the senior enlisted, know where they're going, why are they going there, what time they have to be there, and all elements of the operation. That's very important. So those concepts should be consistent throughout any team, and most successful teams carry those to a new limit. Mm-hmm.
Something that's been fascinating for me to watch in the last 6 weeks or so, Lance, is I've spoken to especially a few millennial members of teams who are really good at tactical deployment of a strategy. But I've had them say that I'm really frustrated because I thought I knew what the strategy was in our meeting on Monday, and by Wednesday, I'd gotten us pretty far down the road, and then all of a sudden that strategy dissolves, and now we're off to a new strategy, and things are changing, and leaders don't always have a map of knowing exactly where they're going or what the strategy is, and the strategy doesn't hold, and that can be frustrating to not only emerging leaders like our millennial employees, the more tactical and that middle manager level. So I think when you talk about communication, I think that's a really important part of the communication plan. This is the strategy that we have for now. This is where, as far as we're going to be able to take it. If it changes, you need to be able to communicate that as quickly as possible and pivot. There's a lot of pivoting going on right now. Exactly.
And it's funny because I think resiliency builds with age and experience. And you're talking millennials, sometimes they're on their first position, their second position out of college. They may not have the experience and resiliency, the life experience, to be as flexible and as the ability to, they haven't had as many difficult situations as older employees have, or people who've experienced more within their life. So it's more difficult for them to be as resilient as others. But they're building resiliency right now. If you think about this whole situation, if you take this on board, everything that you do in life, you go through some extreme changes. Marriage, kids, job change, relocation, all of those aspects build resiliency in people. And if you think about, I survived COVID-19, if I get stuck in an elevator in a 20-story building, well, then I can survive that too. You can look back on all the experiences that you've done that were difficult, and you're just building resiliency. You're building the flexibility to adapt and overcome, as long as you keep that mindset that, okay, the situation's changed. My plan that I briefed on Monday has now changed, and that's Wednesday, and we're going in a different direction. Okay, pivot and make an opportunity out of that. Show others how fast and how well you can pivot, and then don't change speeds. Just keep running. You're on an obstacle course. It's,
That's
one thing
good.
I learned about an obstacle course is you don't try to overpower it. You don't try to outmuscle it. You learn how to flow through it, and you be as efficient as possible. And if you take that mindset into the workplace, it'll help you a lot, I think.
I love that. Don't change speed, just keep running. I think I agree about the resiliency and about there are a lot of people, thank goodness, who are great at the tactical deployment, and they've found their value is in implementing a plan, but relying on other people to put that plan together. So I appreciate the words of advice that you give there, and I think not to be tied into checking the box that I started and completed something from point A to point B. That may not be what our ability to deploy is right now. I think another interesting aspect of where we are right now, Lance, is that we've gone through and are going through this collective wave of change. For some, it's very traumatic. So we're trying to bring people back in, deal with where they are psychologically, physically, and in their ability to get back together as a team, even though they may not have their act together at home in terms of their loved ones, childcare, school. They're not quite able to bifurcate their personal and professional lives. And then we're asking them to come back to work and trust that it's going to be a safe, psychologically safe place, and also a physically safe place to work. But there may be another wave of trauma that's just around the corner. We don't have this thing kicked yet, and it could, we're hearing things that it could come back, big time in the fall, or it could come back just as a result of people getting in each other's space more and more. So that's another, I think, parallel that leaders could learn from you about how do you prepare your team to deal with another, waves of trauma after what they've just gone through and may not have fully processed.
Well, as I said before, just because we've gone through this experience, it'll make the next experience that much easier. If we have another outbreak of COVID and we have to go into a lockdown situation, well, it won't be as traumatic. We've done it before. We're actually getting pretty good at it. So we'll be able to pivot that much better. But you can't expect the worst when you go into a situation. You have to plan for the worst and anticipate the best. So I think by taking the extremes of right and left and then making wise decisions that are somewhat down the middle, I think we'll be fine. There's guidelines to follow. So those are developed by the experts in epidemiology, but then there's also life, and an epidemiologist might have you locked down for another 2 months, but people need to live, so we have to make wise decisions based on the experts' opinions, and the approximate truth is somewhere down the middle. If it happens again, we'll be better able to deal with it just because of the resiliency we've built. But again, the new normal happens every time you change something in your life. So you should be able to bounce back and a little bit more flexible with that. It's important that you articulate that with your team, though, and have clear guidance, clear leadership. You can acknowledge all the far right, the far left ideas, and then say, well, I see that. I know what those ideas are. I see what the opinions are. Here is our guidance based on my rational decision-making process, and here's where we're going to go. And I think as long as people have clear guidance and open communication, they're much better able to deal with any difficult situation.
That's really helpful. I think that, and what a great opportunity for leaders to think about just building best case scenario and worst case scenario into your model, going forward, and finding a clear path between the two, recognizing that it could be, the very best of situations, and we could go back to another wave of what we're in, but finding a clear path between the two and communicating that you've thought, of both sides of the right extreme and the left extreme, and the for-profit extreme, and the everybody staying healthy and nobody getting sick extreme. And if people understand that you've thought those out, then they're more likely to trust in your decision-making process. So I like that.
I think having a plan, a financial plan, having a health plan, and then articulating how the company, how the corporation, how the small team is going to deal with those two particular items that are most important, your health, your family's health, and then your finances. Having a plan in place. And if it's a larger group, then you have an emergency response team where you subdivide your workforce, and you have people that are responsible for communication for 8 or 10 or no more than about 15 people. But that would be your emergency response team. And then you can articulate your guidance in a clear audience-wide platform, but sub-guidance that comes down after that, you can just articulate to your emergency response team members, and then they, in turn, inform the rest of the workforce how things are going to run. And that does a couple of different things. It lets the designated people talk to each individual, and by talking to them, I think you can get a clear gauge of where their head's at, how they are dealing with things psychologically, if they're having issues, and it's much easier to articulate what the guidance is, and then get some feedback, either body language feedback or non-verbal feedback as to how people are dealing with things. One of the best ways that I've experienced with dealing with stress and seeing how people are dealing with stress is to ask them a simple question. Ask them, are you happy? And then people don't take that as what's the word I'm looking for? Something that's probing into their life. It's just it's an open-ended question that invites an answer that you can also talk to me if you're unhappy about something. So it's not saying what's stressing you out, which is kind of a negative context, but it's saying, are you happy? And if you're not, talk to me. What do you have to deal with? And a lot of times you'll get a much more detailed response from that question than you would if you were asking someone what's going on at work, what's going on with your family, how are things, how's your health? But it's
more open-ended invitation.
Yeah, exactly.
I like that. I know that even before this pandemic hit, that mental stress in the workplace was pretty prevalent. People were, just dealing with a lot of stress. There's just so much going on. We're in a 24/7 environment before this, and there was just no space. And I think also the idea of talking about mental stress or emotional counseling in the workplace was somewhat taboo. And I really appreciate the fact that you're, opening that door to, no, it's part of the whole of an individual, and the team will suffer if any members of the team are suffering, and it's not taboo, that we should be able to address that.
I agree. Sometimes we get so politically correct that we lose sight of what we're actually trying to achieve. And we have resident experts in all manners of disciplines that we can turn to, but people are the real resident experts. So to me, if you're in a management situation, or if you're a leader of a group, part of that is obtaining feedback from your group. And by knowing how to read body language and how to read between the lines of what people are saying, I think sometimes you're able to get a better answer or a more complete answer from a question than if you just take what they're trying to say in words and verbiage.
Yeah. I know that you had mentioned in a previous conversation that we were having getting ready for this, that when you look at suicide statistics, many who take their lives don't telegraph their actions. They don't let people know they don't reach out for help. And so being able to read those signs is really a critical part of making sure that our team is whole and healthy, not just physically, but emotionally.
Exactly. And that's the culmination of stress is, well, someone's going to take their life and they're going to check out and think they're going to leave people better off by them not being there. And so many times you've heard it say, well, I never would have thought. And I was just with him yesterday, and then, and that's a terrible thing. But I think we need to be better at reading between the lines and reading people. And I had a very good friend who just yesterday, he's got a business in Alabama, puts in utility pipe. And I texted him for some reason, and I didn't hear back from him, so I called him. He had an industrial accident. He had 3 guys that were in a trench. They were putting in water pipe. The trench collapsed, and he spent 10 hours digging 2 of the guys out, who both were deceased when, of course, when they found them. But now I know he's dealing with that, and I'm going to be calling him and texting him and his wife as well, just to let him know that, I've got his back. If he needs to talk, then I feel his pain, and I know what he's going through. So I think just keeping that contact is going to be very important over the next several days and weeks.
Wow. Yeah. I think that one thing that we can leverage for, I think most of us have changed from in-person meetings to online meetings like this with Zoom, and that has, I think the gift that has given us is to, first of all, kind of strip us away from our organizational charts and our offices and the physical distance sometimes that happens with people when we work together. But on a Zoom call like this, we can see into each other's lives, and the dog barks, and the kids need you right now, and you just have to stop. And so we have a little more layer. We've peeled back a little bit of that professional layers, and we look into each other's lives. We know each other a little better, hopefully, as human beings, and you shouldn't try to unknow that about them. You can continue to keep that conversation going, and it allows you to an opening to have a conversation about how are you doing, and how is your family doing, and how's the dog doing, and is the balloon still tied to the dog's tail?
Right. I have experienced many successful teams, and most of the ones that I experienced have been ones that we went out after the event was over, after a workplace, and we got to know one another on a personal level. And so many times that's lacking in a workplace environment. If you don't do that, if you don't have those social occasions, I think it's very easy just to see someone as very sterile and not really know their personality. But whether it's over a beer or at a softball game or just going to the beach, doing corporate team building events, I found is paramount. I've had several multi-billion-dollar corporations that merged, and I've taken the board of directors of the 2 merging companies and brought them together in a room, and having those 2, and I'll just ask them one question, and to go around the room and each individual person answer one question, and it lets everyone else in the room know what they are like as a person.
Yeah.
You want to know what that question is. Yeah,
absolutely. Not just a position on an org chart or a car that they drive or an office that they sit in. I love that, getting insight. It's being vulnerable with each other, and that starts to help you build trust. So because you've opened the door to that, I'd love to pivot this interview I'd love to learn more about the EPIC Charity Challenge that you started, and why you started it, who's it for, and can you just give us some more insight about it, and where can we learn more about that?
All right. Well, the EPIC Charity Challenge basically came about. It's a culmination of wanting to be outside, working out, breaking through mental and physical barriers, going to iconic locations throughout the world and recreating some of the things that have been done in history that basically changed the course of history. Some of the ones that we've done are the trek from Sparta to Thermopylae that was done by the 300 Spartans in 480 BC.
Wow.
And that was an 8-day, 250-mile run, rucksack march through Greece that if you've never tried it, that's one of the best ways to ever see a country that you can imagine. But doing things like that, and it's for anybody. I had athletes, I reached out to people, but I also had people reach out to me that are just average workers or average athletes or weekend athletes that saw something there that they wanted to attain. So with 6 months training and a regimented training schedule that I send out, I had 20 people show up in Greece, in Athens, Greece, and we went down to Sparta, started our trek, and every day we put in 30 miles a day for 8 days. And you know, at the end of that time, I can call any one of those people on the telephone today and say, hey, I'm having an issue, or I can call and say, meet me in Iceland tomorrow, and they would be there. It's kind of the camaraderie that you build when you do things like that.
Mm-hmm.
But it's for anybody. But the culminating factor for that was that we raised over $150,000 for the Navy SEAL Foundation. So each and every step that you took and every day that you had behind you was more money that was available for the Navy SEAL Foundation to give to wounded warrior scholarships and help transition active duty members out of the SEAL team so they don't have to go and be a contractor for the next 10 years, you know, and put themselves in harm's way the entire time. But each and every one of those is in a different location, and it's got a different charity, and it involves different things, but they're all possible by anyone who puts their mind to it. And by having that on your roadmap or on your radar, and you know that's coming up in September, and I've got to be somewhere in September, and I've got to be prepared for that, it helps you get out of bed every day and put on your shoes and go out and train and just become 1% better every day. And then by the time the event shows, you know, the event is occurring, you show up and you're ready, and you know you've put in the homework, so your confidence is there, and then you've got a team of people around you who you've been accountable to via Facebook and via my website, and I'm checking in on you the entire time while you're training up for it. So people will show up, they've done the homework, they're ready for it, and they line up and they do it, and every step that they take or every lap that they swim or mile that they go, they're making money for a very worthwhile charity.
That's really amazing. Danielle, I just quickly want to check in with you. I know we're about a quarter till the hour. I could talk to Lance all day, but I'm just curious, do we have any questions, or can I keep?
You can't keep. I have a few questions, if that's all right with you, Sherry and Lance. Lance, first question, how do you integrate resilience into staff development plans?
Okay, great question. Staff development. We do a lot of team building. So all the team building exercises that we do build resilience because they're difficult. And we're putting people through mental and physical hardships or challenges at each and every time that we do those. So those are building resilience. At the same time, they're building personality and they're allowing people to know each other. So part of the resilience is knowing that you have people behind you that you can depend on. And by knowing people on a personal level, then I think you know who you can depend on and who you can't depend on, or you know what other people's strong points are. So if you have something that requires this person's strong point, you know exactly who to go to, and you're not spinning your wheels trying to get a particular situation addressed.
Thank you. And speaking of behind you, it looks like we have a visitor. Hi. It's okay.
Oh, that's my
All
dog
good.
and my daughter.
Yeah. Hello. Like we said, we have a up close and personal inside look into people's lives in a whole new way.
Yeah.
Yeah, thank you for sharing that. Another question we got actually was, when's your next, or is your next epic challenge going to be? I know you mentioned Greece in your last comment, but yeah, it sounds like they're interested in where. Where are you going?
We were supposed to be in Iwo Jima in March 29th, and that got postponed by the Japanese government. So October, November timeframe. I don't have a date for it yet, but we're going back to Iwo Jima. And because they wouldn't allow me to do a charity challenge on the island, Guam is our base for that. And then we're going to basically circumnavigate Guam, which is it's a 90-mile island from top to bottom. So we're going to circumnavigate Guam with bicycles, running, swimming, outrigger canoe paddling, and rucking through the jungle as well. After that, we're doing rim to rim to rim on the Grand Canyon.
Oh, wow.
And I've got a schedule probably for May of 2021. And then after that, there'll be a complete ring. There's a ring road ride that goes around Iceland. It's about an 850-mile ride. And we're going to do that on bicycles, either as a relay team or individual. So each one of these challenges has an effort that is possible, but if for some reason you are not a good swimmer, then I'll put you in a boat. You know, we did a simulated landing on D-Day in 2018 onto Omaha Beach in Normandy. And I had 6 people who were not really good swimmers. So I actually had the Coast Guard drop us off 7 miles out in the English Channel, and we swam into Omaha Beach. But there were 6 people who were not going to be English Channel swimmers for 7 miles in 6 months' time. So I put them in a rubber boat, and they all paddled in from the start point. So there's always a way to keep people in the game based on what their capabilities are. And it's challenging for me sometimes, but I like that challenge, is to be able to leave no person behind. If they want to achieve that, if they want to be a part of that experience, then I'll find a way to make them a part of that. I've worked with a lot of groups who were adaptive athletes, and if they had prosthetics, if they had something cognitive or physical that kept them from doing something in a regular way, you'd be very, very surprised at the innovation of a person who wants something. And I've been completely amazed by people, how they've found ways to do things despite all the physical barriers that are presented to them. And I've been just so inspired by having a guy do box jumps in a parking lot, and his prosthetic falls off. He has a prosthetic on one leg, and it falls off, and he bounces across the parking lot, stops doing what he's doing. He hops over, gets his prosthetic, puts it back on, hops back over, and continues doing the box jump. I mean, to me, that just takes my game to a whole new level. Seeing people do things like that, it's very inspiring.
I love that, and I imagine myself as one of the people that would be in that that raft that you described, but wanting to be a part of a long swim, but knowing that I'd be afraid, but knowing that there's a way for me to participate still, that there's still space for me to play, if you will.
Absolutely.
To train.
And I need to share, on our trip in Greece, then I had a participant who, Kyle Maynard, who is a very noted speaker, great person. Kyle was born with no arms and no legs. Kyle wanted to go on this trip. Kyle bought a bicycle, and it's a recumbent bicycle that hand pedals. Well, Kyle has basically got nubs from the shoulders down, but Kyle basically took these and he took his nubs and he pedaled the bicycle to the equivalent of about 10,000 pull-ups per day. And sometimes we were going up a trail and we'd push Kyle in his bicycle up the trail, and then we get to the top and we'd push him down the other side and wave goodbye, as he goes down about 40 miles an hour screaming like a Girl Scout, selling cookies or something. But those things like that, to the other participants that are on an event like that, and they see Kyle or they see someone with a prosthetic doing that same event, what place do they have to complain about, oh, my foot hurts, my leg hurts? I'll say, go talk to Kyle about your hurt leg, and he'll tell you, basically to stop complaining.
You're right. That's so inspiring. Having done my first triathlon and feeling like I couldn't get through the run at the end, I remember seeing someone with a prosthetic and thinking, if they can do it, I can too. And just not just that, but their positivity on the trail that we were on at the time, just cheering other people on, just was extremely inspiring. So I think that's wonderful. Thank you for sharing that. And I think I was just curious about mental resiliency for these challenges. What are some of the principles that you instill in preparation, helping people prepare? You talk about 6 months of physical training, and I know I'm sure mental training too. So what are some of the, principles, if you will, or how do you get them in the right mindset to take on such for me, what would seem like a huge undertaking, huge challenge?
Well, I try to give people step-by-step instructions, and I ramp them up. So instead of starting out very fast, we start out slow, and 6 months out, and then we'll start crawling, and then we'll start walking, and then we'll start running. But I'll put challenges out in front of people weekly, and some people may come in and they're very well conditioned, and those challenges will be easy for them. And I'll say, okay, well, if it's easy for you, then double the challenge. But the people who want to come in, and if I'll put a 10-mile walk in and try to do that at 4 minutes, 4 mile per hour pace, and then the next week will be, now we're going to do 10 miles, the same test, but we're going to put on 10 pounds of sand in our backpack. So we'll build them up slowly, and we'll have them check in mentally, tell me how you're feeling, how you felt at the end of the day, and then everyone will share their results. So for instance, I'll do a swim camp where I'll have people send in their GPS swims if we're doing a swimming event. So everyone is accountable for what they have to do, and we're all checking up on one another, because I'll tell them at some point in time I'm going to assign you a teammate for you to, because I generally do have two-person integrity on each one of these events. So you're not out there by yourself, and I'll assign a teammate that is in the same neighborhood, same ballpark that you are physically. And so you two will be responsible for each other, but you'll also be responsible to the group to make sure that you're in shape and you show up and you've done your homework. And that's very confidence inspiring to people.
Absolutely. Yeah. Thank you for that. Thank you, Lance, for joining us today. And thank you for just the experience that you bring and the wisdom behind all of your epic adventures and to your service, for your service to this country. I really appreciate you bringing that today. And to everybody on the webinar, thank you for being here. As I mentioned earlier, you'll all receive a link to the recorded version of today's webinar by tomorrow morning, in case you want to see it again or share it with friends or colleagues. And then also wanted to let people know, save the date for our next webinar of this series. Our next webinar will be on June 11th at 11 a.m. Pacific time. We'll be interviewing the CEO of a prominent hospital in San Diego and how they led their organization and relied on data to make good decisions in the midst of uncertainty. So we'll be announcing who will be joining us in an email next week. So until then, be safe, everyone. Thanks for joining us. Lance, thank you so much for being here. It was a lot of fun. Sherry, always good to be with you too.
Thank you. Thanks, Danielle, for all your excellent job of hosting and putting this together and making sure that we are, have the technical background. Also, I'd love to be able to share more about the where people can learn more about the Epic Charity Challenge when we send out the recorded version of this video to people, because I'm sure a lot of people would love to check it out. I would.
I'll include that in the email as well.
All right.
Sounds
Thank
great.
you, Lance.
Thanks,
Thank you,
everyone.
Danielle.
Bye, Lance. Have a great
Appreciate it.
day.
Yeah.
Bye-bye.
I will.
Bye.